Thank you for joining for this episode of the TechSpective Podcast. I have with me again my friend Sam Curry. So Sam, if you want to introduce yourself and give a little bit of background.
Sure. My name is Sam Curry. I'm Global VP and CSO in residence at Zscaler. We've known each other for many years. I've been knocking around with some big brands like McAfee and RSA, EMC for years, Arbor Networks, and so on. Also a fellow at National Security Institute, and I teach at Wentworth Institute of Technology and Nichols College. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, actually, real quick before we go off into other stuff. Speaking of your teaching role, I think the last time I had you on the podcast, we were talking about generative AI and kind of the advent of everyone using it, and schools and employers trying to fight against it and say, well, don't use that. And I've talked about the example you gave of how you work with your students to say, well, no, use it, but show me your work. I want to know what your prompt was. I want to know, it's basically like, and actually the generative AI models now do that. Like if you use like the reasoning model, it will provide you, okay, well, here's what I considered here's my thought process. But that all made tremendous sense to me, because this is very much a tidal wave. Like you're not going to fight it. You can try it all you want to say that, you can't use this at work or you can't use this at school. All that means is I'm going to find a way around your rules.
Yep, very much so. And in fact, I think it's no longer a question of if you use it or not, it's how you use it. And what I'm seeing is a desire from companies to get into the more fine-grained policies about how to use it. So it's not that they want to hold it at the door. They want to be able to say what kinds of data can go in there, what kinds of roles can use it. Can lawyers send this kind of information to this app? Can developers send it to this app? How can you trace what went this way? What are the APIs here? What are the third parties behind it? It feels a lot like the days of private cloud to some extent, but different. And the fact that the information isn't just what you send out, it's being able to get a full picture of what you might be shedding light on with the information that went out. And I think this is now, it's past the point of do we do this or don't we? It's material for companies. The sooner they adopt it, the more it impacts their core business. There's also been, so we found, by the way, with a survey we did at Zscaler, that it continues to be the most adopted technology, and ChatGPT is at the top of the list still, and Grammarly is behind it, and Microsoft Copilot, and things like that. And it's still, ChatGPT is still the most blocked simultaneously, right? So we had this survey we did that was like, it is both the most exciting and important technology, LLMs and Gen AI, and also the most risky and scary. Both are simultaneously true, which is a fascinating thing. And the rate of adoption is enormous. We saw over 800 applications in normal traffic that are embedding this in what they do. There's been other surveys, though. I saw that there's actually things like a generational bias and a gender bias in adoption. So it seems like, and I couldn't have predicted this, but this is from third parties, and we can look it up and maybe put it in the comment section when you publish this. It seems that men use it more than women. And it would seem that older generations are using it more than younger generations. And I have no idea why. None at all. I can
shed some light on that.
Oh, please do.
So first of all, I will say it's interesting to me because I've used Grammarly forever. I used Otter forever.
Oh, is it because his men were more handicapped? That's possible. Is it?
That's actually that would be a relevant line to look at. But yeah, like I was using those tools before ChatGPT and before I even thought of them as AI tools. But I
and before they were, by the way.
Yeah,
they were.
And I use ChatGPT. I use a variety of things. I use Perplexity. I mean, I play around with different things. I will say, I know that some employers are using ChatGPT in like a local mode, like you can license the LLM, and so you still have ChatGPT, but you're not sharing with the general public.
Yep.
But here's the generational note I will give you. I have 7 kids. They're all adults. They, some maybe dabble with it, but I will tell you that I have some kids who are adamantly opposed to the concept of LLMs and generative AI from a climate sustainability perspective. All they can see is the amount of electricity that's being drawn. So they're like, okay, so when you ask ChatGPT what restaurant you should go to, like a small village in Africa no longer has power.
Interesting. It's a green argument. It's a justice argument. It's a social value.
I mean, and that's
argument.
that's only one perspective, but that's the perspective I have, anecdotally, in my life, is that my kids are opposed because of the green angle, and also from the theft angle, the copyright theft angle.
It's interesting because this is a generational gap, right? I'm Gen X, you are too, I think, right? I heard about Dead Poets Society. It was a story. I think it was in the Atlantic. Someone said that they had showed their I think it was a Gen Z child, Dead Poet Society, and they got angry, like really angry. And the reason was, in our generation, we sort of saw movies where you couldn't change society, where you fought valiantly, and the moral of the story was that you remained unchanged and you found your truth and you soldiered on in the face of it. But the stories at the turn of the century and going into 2010s are, no, you actually win. You make the change. You succeed in your intention. And so they were at the end of the movie when the school didn't change, right? That this and so there's these big cultural divides. I'm very concerned about the environment, and I know that they consume a lot of power, like a ridiculous amount of power. And I know that there's some new advances that are using up less, but I wouldn't have made that connection when it comes to using ChatGPT. That's a hypocrisy, by the way. And it's funny that there's some studies done that at certain ages in your life, you can't abide hypocrisy. And later, you live with it. We couldn't when we were younger.
That's
when we were younger, we couldn't either when we were like in our 20s, right?
Well, I have talked to my kids, and I've said, look, you're not going to fight this tidal wave. Like it's coming. Now you can decide to be on the side of, how do I make this as energy efficient as possible? How do I minimize the impact? What other things can I do from an infrastructure perspective that will make this not as damaging? But the genie's out of the bottle. You're not going to shut down generative AI. I don't, so give that.
Just like you didn't stop cloud, and you didn't stop computers, and you didn't stop cars, and yeah, it's funny, when we had COVID, the skies got clearer, right? Species rebounded, and yet a scant 2 years later, it was worse. And that doesn't mean that we have to be that way. There's something, I don't know if I've ever spoken to you about this, something called Moloch's demon, right? It was an old, I want to say it was a Philistine or another Semitic deity that became a demon in Judeo-Christian mythology. It is this notion that there's a treadmill that you can't get off of. Nuclear technology in our consciousness leads to nuclear war. That's one. There's another one that somehow we are bound to a world that will be destroyed by our technology. When my son was learning to ride a bike, there was I took him out to a field, figured it was easier than falling on concrete. And there was one tree. I said, don't hit the tree. Guess what he did? He was staring at the tree and he hit the tree. Right. And that's what we do societally sometimes. So, when you're talking about AI and we're talking about things like the impact on the environment, or we talk about how they will play a role in our society, they could go well, or it could go poorly, or it could go neither. But we seem to be staring at the tree a lot. And I think we've got to start thinking, how do we not do that?
Yeah, I have two, I guess, corollary things for that. Number one is, and I have to go look this up, but the study on like why is it that drunk drivers get into head-on accidents? And it's because they're looking at the headlights coming at them, concentrating what few brain cells that have left that are sober to say, I want to avoid those headlights coming at me.
And they're staring at them.
But they're focused on the headlights, and so that's where they go.
So
And
Moloch's chauffeur. Yeah, I'm with you.
right. And the other one being when I was doing sales back when, and studying like Zig Ziglar and these guys, they would talk about the psychology of the brain doesn't process negatives. If I tell you don't do this thing, all you think about is this thing.
Doing the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you only focus on the thing part, not the don't part.
So don't buy this. Really don't buy this. Don't
Yeah.
buy this. Don't buy this. Don't buy this. And look, you made your commission. Yeah.
Yes. So yes. So I mean, so there is that angle, and actually going back to your Dead Poet Society thing too, I would say I've had many a cultural political discussion with my kids.
You've got 7 of them. My goodness. Yes. Yeah. I would hope so.
And I will say they are all, like, I consider myself left of center. Like, I am not a centrist. I am left of center. My kids make me look like a centrist because they are much farther left of center than I am. And throughout the Biden administration, my kids were very frustrated. They're like, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? Like, we own the House, we own the Senate, we own the presidency. Why aren't we doing that? And I had to keep saying, okay, we don't really have the Senate. Like, I know we do on paper, but because we've got Manchin, because we've got Sinema, we lose those two. Yeah. We lose those 2 votes, and all of a sudden you can't do anything. So it's kind of like a stalemate. And they just, my kids did not and do not want to accept that. They're like, well, then you burn it all down and do something else, because they're like, that's not tenable. You can't tell me that that within the system we can't change things. If we can't change things within the system, then we need to burn the system down and start over.
Yeah, it's this is what happens when we drift too far from the center, right? We both create the other side stronger, and there's a rejection of the institutions and of the center itself by both sides. This is why the center is itself a position, and a strong one. It's not sitting on a fence. It's an important position.
Well, and I want to pull this back to technology and AI, but I will say that as someone who is left of center myself, during the campaign cycle, when they started to try to paint Kamala Harris and Tim Walz as socialists, as extreme leftist liberals, and I was like, are you on crack? They're barely left of middle. Like, I consider them right wing. And when I look at the current actual, the leadership, the Chuck Schumer and the Jeffries, leading the Senate and the House for the Democrats, I do look at them and I say, yeah, those guys need to go. We need actual people on the left leading.
Yeah, the terms that get misused, socialism is one that gets misused. Karl Marx was actually a philosopher, not an economist, and it shows in what he wrote. Yeah. And what he said was, we're social creatures, and we're inhibited from being social creatures because of class. And the thing that makes that possible is capital. Therefore, get rid of capital, you get rid of class, and then you wind up with us being the true social creatures we are. Now, that's naive as an economic perspective, and that's sociology. I have never heard anybody in our political mainstream talking in that language. Never.
Well, I didn't know until recently. Like, I've known in my lifetime that communism and socialism are constantly used as boogeymen. They're constantly beating people over the head with, communism and socialism.
So is fascism.
And but I just, the more I read, the more I've found out that we were using those back in, Lincoln's time, those were already the boogeymen. And so for 150 years, we've been using socialism as like a boogeyman to beat people over the head with, to keep them in line with free market capitalism. But when you stop and you actually look, like you just said, like if you stop and you actually look at, well, what was being said, what is meant by socialism? Like,
yeah, but here's the problem. We're talking about it logically. This is not about logic. It is about emotion.
Good segue. All right, so let's talk about AI deepfakes, and just and it doesn't even have to. It's not even really all just AI. It's phishing scams in general, kind of appeal to, there's that sense of urgency, that comes along with it, with most attacks of, it's not just, hey, Sam, I'm sending you this thing and I'd like for you to click on this link. It's, hey, Sam, I'm sending you this link. You must click on this link right now or bad things are going to happen.
Mm. So I think if you've ever read Blink by Malcolm Gladwell or Thinking Fast and Slow by Kahneman, right? Some of those, most of the brain is a subconscious computer that is constantly sorting and coming up with systems. It's not logical in the way that we would think, of logic and philosophy. Our conscious brain is actually fairly weak and slow, but it's the one that governs and says, don't click on links, right? And so once you can take care of that conscious part of the brain, then that larger part suddenly brings an emotional push. And now it's hard to stop. That's where the momentum comes from. So I'm going to mention my father. People can look this up. If this is later, this was in late March of 2025. He received an email that said that he had some compromised accounts. Now, he's a smart man. He's a PhD. He used to be a cyber guy. He's retired now on Social Security. And he wouldn't mind me saying this. He wants people to know about it. And my brother's also a cyber guy, just like me. And what happened is he got this email. He looked at it. He knows don't click on it. He knows don't call the numbers in there. And the email said, contact us. It had a brand. It said, here's the number. Don't call it. Go Google our brand. The brand, I think, had a qualifier next to it. We're still confirming that. He did that. He called the number. So he did it right. Now that thinking logical part of your brain is satisfied that you followed the right process. Now you're in that trust dimension and the momentum of the brain kicks in and the emotions are there. And they led him through small steps where he was transferred and the bad quality of call with Australia. We're in the United States. Eventually, he was passed over to WhatsApp. Now, he knows WhatsApp is not trusted in a corporate context, but it is trusted. We've even had FBI telling us, don't SMS, use WhatsApp, right? And he uses it to talk to his sister, who happens to be in Australia. So alarm bells didn't go off at that point. Now, he transferred money into Bitcoin. It was frozen. But when my brother called him, and heard about this, my brother's alarm bells went off, but my father's emotions were rooted in the momentum of still continuing. And this happens to us everywhere. It's human nature. That's what social cons do. That's what social engineering does. That's what con people do, con men, con women. And that is unfortunately when you're the darker side, the bad people, you have the time to sit back and go, how can I take advantage of people at this stage? How can I get to the money? It's terrible, but the people that do this refer to it as pig slaughtering. It's horrible. They think of, there's people that have money, large sums of it because they retired, maybe a 401k, maybe they live on an annuity and they don't care. It's a big chunk of money that they can move and get out and they're done. They don't care about the consequences. So they've got the time to think of these scams and do them, and they do them well. So that's, I think, where you were headed, right? I hope it was. Or I just used up a lot of time, but yeah.
It is. Well, it's funny because.
By the way, that could happen to you and me. Anybody.
Yes.
Absolutely anybody. It's not a, oh, gee, somebody didn't know the cyber rules. Nope.
Right. Well, so on the one hand, I was going to say, I've been around long enough to see the birth and rise of the internet. And there are things that like were funny. That you think of The Onion, or the onion.com or whatever. It's like those are funny stories. So they were 15, 20 years ago. Those were funny stories. But now it's kind of now it's used against us more. It's like what could just be satire is like it's like someone with a more insidious mind said, oh yes, but what if I take that and I do something else with it? Like you said, like turn it into a con. Yeah, and so now it's being used against us in ways. But I was going to say too, like yes, it could happen to us, and it's also one of the reasons that I'm, and this is tangential, but why I'm opposed in principle to the concept of employers doing like the phishing tests, where they're going to send you fake phishing messages to see see if you can catch them. Because I'm like, I don't feel like you're proving anything. Like, yes, I'm pretty good at determining that it's a phishing link and letting you know. Someone else is not as good as me, and now we know that, but it doesn't change anything for future phishing attacks. And it is still possible. Like, I can't say that I've never fallen for one.
No,
so it's like,
no. But here we have a problem. We need to feel like we're doing something. Doing something is better than doing nothing, right? Sometimes it's not. That's the crazy thing. Sometimes we feel like we're lazy or we're guilty. We didn't do a task. Compliance is meant to drive us to do the things we wouldn't otherwise do. After a certain point, it can hurt us. I'll give you an example. Used to be that passwords were broken by trying many combinations. So if you had 6 failed password attempts, you should know about that, right? But bad guys don't get them wrong anymore. They get them right. If you are getting 6 failed passwords, it means one of two things. Either you have a user in distress, in which case IT needs to know about it, or a bad guy is trying to distract you and tie up people power so that you can't actually go and manage real incidents. So guess what? If a regulation requires you to track and deal with every instance of 6 failed logins, it's actually hurting your cyber program.
Yeah.
And there's many more instances of that. And so what are we doing? You must be training people. And if you track effectiveness of anti-phishing programs, many of them, you get better at stopping phishing, and then you start to get worse. The academic research looks at many reasons for it, but I'll tell you, just because you're doing something doesn't mean it's worth it, but it does make us feel better.
Well, yeah. Well, I was going to say, first of all, it reminds me of the famous anecdote of the B-17 bombers returning to base with the bullet holes.
Oh yeah, I forget the name of the bias, and they were like, "Oh, let's reinforce where the bullet holes are." Yeah.
And they're like, no, we need to reinforce where the bullet holes aren't because those planes didn't come back. And it's right. And it reminded me of that because I remember when I was working as a network admin and it was my job to look at the logs and to see these things, and we had policies in place. And one of the things we would do is we would look at the logs of failed login attempts. And this is, to my credit, I'm going to pat myself on the back now. Before I knew about this B-17 bomber anecdote, I went to my manager and I was like, I don't know if this is really the thing we should be doing. And he's like, well, why? And I said, well, they failed. Like, by definition, we're looking at a log of failed attempts. It's like, what I need to be looking at is who succeeded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then they're thinking, well, that's millions of people or successful logins, and it's like, yep. There's something else though that follows on from what you said. It's not just about who succeeded; it's what they did before and after. And we have too atomic a recording in our log records, because what we do is we say failed or successful login, and we don't actually say, and what happened with that user right before, or that machine right before, or right after. I care about that event as part of a sequence of events. And our data structures for decades now have not been geared that way. I care about chains of behavior. So I care about when I have, for instance, a successful login followed by, let's say, a process injection, followed by an outbound connection, followed by a downloaded file, followed by a spawning of a process, followed by a change of privilege. Well, that sequence is bad, and maybe then lateral movement. I don't care about if it's successful login, spawning a process, and then logging out. Users do that all day long.
Yeah. Going back to this concept, the concept of emotion, though, and I know I've talked about this in a previous podcast. There are a handful of known, very public stories at this point of someone in accounting getting either a voice message or a fake video message or even just an email saying, hey, this is the CEO, this is the CFO, this is whoever, why wasn't this money transferred to our partner? Now it's late. and I need you to transfer, $50 million right now. And they do it. And again, that's the urgency of the attack message and trying to drive that emotional response. And I had said in this previous podcast, I said, you have to instill in people to stop and double check. And even if a CFO is pissed off at you, like let's say it's legit. Let's say you missed a payment and you owe a client or a partner or someone, you owe someone $50 million, and your CFO is pissed off. Okay, well, you should still pick up the phone and directly call that CFO before you transfer $50 million and just make sure that you're doing the right thing. They're not going to get more pissed off because you double checked. And it reminds me too, like going back to my kids. My kids, when we were talking a few months back, or I don't know, it was the middle of last year, we were talking about deepfakes, and one of my kids said, we should have a code word for you, for me.
You should actually have two code words, but go on.
Well, we should have a code word for you. And I was like, well, why just me? He's like, well, I mean, for anybody, but he's like, but you're the one who, your likeness, your voice, everything is out there in the world. So it would be very easy to deepfake you. And if we get a call from someone that says, hey, this is Dad, and, I need blah, 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 blah. There needs to be, our like family code word of, double checking, like, is this really you?
Mm-hmm. Well, you need two, actually. You need one that is, it's me and everything's okay. You need one that's, it's me and I'm not okay. Because in that instance, they may have to still go buy the gift card or pretend to while they call the police.
Yeah, I mean there's memes about it, but we've talked about that one too. It's the, what question could I ask you where, like, I know for sure your answer would not be that. Like my kids know I hate pickles. My kids know I'm adamantly atheist. So you could ask me any question about like religion or pickles, and probably clarify whether it's really me.
Mm-hmm. And your God's not a pickle. But there's a few things that come to mind as you were talking. One is that we as cyber people tend to think in absolutes, and we often forget that just because we find a way something can be broken, it's still worth doing. So, for instance, keep that in mind, because we have a cultural problem. Even my own Zscaler had an attempt to impersonate our CEO, a gift card scam, right? And so CEOs of companies and people in power have to stand up and tell the organization, this is the only way we'll do it. This is it. I will never do that. And then you can even say, and if you think that's happening, you'll be rewarded for saying no. That's a cultural, difficult thing to convince an organization to do, such that if your CEO gets on the phone and asks you to wire $5 million or 50, as you said, but some big number, and you're like, he or she is asking me to do this in a way I've never been asked and told they won't, but there's a $5,000 bonus if I call this, if I make this not happen. No, saying no to power. Okay, so that's tough. The other thing is that we do have other ways of making controls. We used to have this principle of dual control or two-person integrity that we don't use anymore. Separation of duty, sure, we still have it with accounts payable and accounts receivable, but we could be using that and identify places where it applies. And even in technology, we could be doing innovation. There's Shamir's secret sharing algorithm, right? Where you have to have some M number of N things like credentials in order for something to happen. And above a certain amount, maybe you need 3 people to sign for something. Now, that just means that either there's collusion or 3 people have to be convinced, but at least it says that one of those people has to say, wait, I was told this would never happen this way, right? And so let's go back to, all right, so somebody could just convince those 3 people and it could just be done. But no, this is where the absolutism has to stop, because what we're doing is making it more expensive and more difficult, and we're forcing them back to the innovation drawing board. That is an advantage. We are not in a world of getting to perfect security or imperfect security. We're in a world of small incremental improvements make a difference. They drive the swarm somewhere else, or they in fact go do something else. That's valuable.
Yeah, I mean, so the parallel I would say is so back when Wi-Fi was first becoming a thing, and you had WEP, and then WEP crack came out, and everyone was like, well, now I can crack
Don't bother.
I can crack
No.
your WEP in under a minute. So what's the point? And I wrote an article, probably for PC World at the time, but I wrote an article where I was like, well, okay, but if someone's war driving down your block, and
Yeah, in your threat profile, that's actually fairly unlikely,
right,
as opposed to the neighbor,
right,
who doesn't know how to web crack. Yeah,
but still, I'm like, but an attacker is like, there's going to be a neighbor of yours is going to not have any web encryption at all, and even if you have the web encryption, yes, I can crack it, but you're no longer the low-hanging fruit. So I'm like, so yes, by all means, go get Web 2, go get WPA, like you should upgrade. But in the meantime, that doesn't mean don't do the one thing you have.
Nobody should go turn it off because it could be broken by someone. Yeah.
Right. You don't need to surrender in advance.
Or when SHA-1 had a collision issue, right? And everyone's like, oh, it's broken, it's dead. It's like, oh yeah, okay, sure. Were you just gonna not sign things?
Yep.
Don't worry, you can keep using it for now. Yes, it's weak. Yes, it's vulnerable. Yes, it can be taken advantage of. But it isn't like it's all been weaponized and there are exploits for it immediately for your use case.
Right.
Now, go SHA-256 it in your development plans. But for now, you're probably okay.
Yeah. That actually is there's a thing I've said many times, and I'm not a mathematician. I am not a cryptographer. So I could be wrong. And if you know more than me, then by all means correct me. But when we talk about encryption, we talk about things in terms of we often talk about it in terms of it would take 10 years to crack this. It would take 1,000 years.
It's all costs to break. Yeah.
Right. Like
which is loosely tied to mathematical complexity. Yeah.
Right. Which is based on, I guess, some predefined, what computer system are we using to do this?
It's based on hardware and the algorithms that you've implemented in software, usually badly, but yeah.
But the first thought that occurred to me the first time I heard that was, okay, but you're assuming it's going to take me all of the guesses.
Oh yeah.
What if I get it right on the first guess?
You might, and usually I believe I think they do assume that, but I believe normally it's there's actually, you can do calculations with these things and find the mean time to a result, but actually the statistical distribution matters. And usually the assumption should be the middle, not knowing anything else about the data set or what have you. But also the technique you use to crack matters. The samples that you use matter. There's also some weak keys that you could try first, right? And by the way, random numbers. Are there biases in the random number generation that make the number spectrum biased towards certain areas so that you have more likelihood of guessing the keys there? That's interesting. Right? So no, it doesn't take every guess. And knowing the distribution and knowing how keys fall out in the real world makes a difference to how you approach and break it.
Right. As a matter of fact, I would even flip it and say, yes, it's theoretically possible I could get it on the first guess or the first 10 guesses. It's also it's statistically unlikely that it would take me until the last guess.
Yes, actually. That's why I'm always really upset when my bag coming off the airplane is the last one. Like, really? But there's some very strange phenomena that you can look up in academic papers, like the fact that actually thinking with a real random number generator about a result will actually bias statistically in a meaningful way the results. Weird. We get into quantum mechanical effects. That's probably a little bit too much for this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we get into the whole, the act of observing a thing changes.
Concentrate on the key you want. I'm thinking.
Yeah. But I was going to say that your luggage coming off is a good example. The other example for me is I have yet to figure out what is the algorithm that makes it possible for my gate at the airport to always be the last one. Like somebody's flying on a plane at that first gate.
It's
So
that you're
how is it?
it's that you're shifting through multiple realities to the one where that's true because you're manifesting it. That's clearly what's happening.
Yeah, it's uncanny.
Uncanny.
I walk past all these people who are waiting for their plane at a closer gate, and mine is always the one at the end of the hall.
That's all. If you had predicted it at security, it would have been the first one, though, just so you know.
All right, well, I'll have to try that next time. See if I can kind of mess with the quantum mechanics.
Numbers normally don't care what we think. Just say that.
Well, so I mean, what are your thoughts on going kind of pulling us back to the kind of the phishing and the AI and the stuff like I mean deepfakes. Okay, so right now I personally would say most of them are not very good still. I keep seeing people share them where they're like, oh, look at this, we're screwed now. And I'm like, I don't know. I look at that and I go, yeah, that's a deep fake. It's like, it is pretty obvious to me still at this point. But the thing is, most people aren't me. And, most people might fall for it. And what is society supposed to do in a world where if you see something online, if you see something shared by mainstream media, you don't have a way to guarantee it's legit?
Well, so two other instances of things like that come to mind. First of all, printers won't print perfect currency. There's a reason for it. The tech industry has prevented them from being able to do so. You can't photocopy a dollar bill and have it come out right. That doesn't mean you couldn't, but you can't with the technologies that exist today. Somebody could make printers that do, but they don't exist in the market. That's one. So what does that mean for AI? Well, it means that we could build AI in such a way that there's some things it just won't be very good at. That doesn't mean somebody couldn't make a version that can do it. Really important to denote. It just makes it more developmentally intense and difficult for the bad guys to create those. The second example is in the movie industry, for a long time, we've been able to create CGI so effective that you can't tell it from reality. But it turns out in instances where that it's, for instance, not Carrie Fisher because she's dead, right? As just one example, then we actually put imperfections in because otherwise it creeps people out. Like we kind of uncanny valley it a little bit is one way to put it. And so I'm not convinced that these deep fakes are as bad as they could be, or rather maybe they're worse than they could be. So it is possible that with current technology, they could be much better, but for tuning and refinement, and that we could take steps collectively to make the engines not great at it. But we've already seen how when we put those guardrails in, we can still social engineer the AI.
Well, okay, so I would say the two things. Number one, that actually kind of reminds me of this is just one example. I think there's other ones, but like with satellite imagery, that as that became available to the public, the government said, okay, well, we're going to let you have access to this, but we have access to one that can, read your driver's license number from space, but we're going to give you access to one that basically can just see your car. Like we're not going to give you the refined technology.
Yeah, you're not reading license plates. Yeah.
We do have other instances like that where it's like, well, we know the technology is capable, but that doesn't mean we have to give everyone that technology. But then the flip side, and this kind of goes back to what you alluded to with the printer thing, is, well, that assumes I'm using a printer that I bought from HP or whatever that follows the rules. And I've gone through this mental exercise with many different things over the years when it comes to cybersecurity. When we pass laws and we have
happened with crypto.
Right.
Encryption, by the way.
Right. Well, so we say, here's the law. You can't do this. I'm like, okay, well, here's the thing about criminals. They don't care. Like it's not like they were doing something and then you made a law and they go, oh, sorry, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to be doing that.
I remember the strong encryption export restrictions and,
PGP.
PGP issues and it's classified as ammunition and so on. And the assumption behind that was that the best would always be made here. That's not always true unless you actually are being bought, right? New technology can be built elsewhere. Once the barrier to entry goes away, once people are incented to not buy American. And so maybe that's a word of warning that we need to remember that we're part of a global community and we need to be buying and selling and trading with each other globally.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't want to take us down that path, but given the current trajectory, I'm like, we're creating a scenario as a nation, as the United States, we're creating a scenario where that won't necessarily be the case. You know,
already there are rivals in the AI game, right? China,
right,
for instance, has some, and so on. Yeah.
And there's brain drain going on. I mean, we've got, you know, I've seen the stories. There's three different professors from Yale who are leaving for Canada. There are French universities that have opened the floodgates to say, hey, if you are a like doctoral candidate, scientist, you know, student in the United States, come to France. You know, we will let you do research. And it's like, yeah, and the more we let that go on.
NCI is a great organization. The Grande École, they're good.
Yeah. Yeah. So the more that goes on, the less exceptional, you know, we are.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. So yeah, I think we covered so many things. I think people will take away that what they want, but yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. So I want to, you know, thank you for taking the time and yeah, I mean,
Tony, I always enjoy it. It's awesome.
Yes. Well, I mean, I enjoy talking to you and I really appreciate it. And yeah, and we did kind of go all over the place, but I think, you know,
there's some themes.
It's just a challenge that, you know, both people and organizations are going to have to figure out how to deal with as AI helps attacks be more authentic and realistic and convincing. You know, developing the tools and processes to be able to avoid them.
So I would say cultural change, but I would also say there's an elegance and simplicity. Zero trust is a principle. If you have less complexity, not that you can't support complexity, but less complicated infrastructure, if you have less of an attack surface, if you do the authorization in a more fine-grained way, for instance, there's less to be exploited and taken advantage of. That's as true, by the way, in networks as it is in identity, as it is in process. And so I'd say, if anything, a way to become more resilient in the future is to follow least privilege and least function wherever you can.
Awesome. All right. Well, take care.
All right. Thank you, Tony.
All right. I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow @TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.